Hi, everyone. Thank you for attending Behind the Scenes at mabl. Today, we're going to be talking about the testing strategies that we use at mabl and specifically how we actually test the mabl application with mabl. So to introduce myself, my name is Lauren Kleberg, and I've been working at mabl for about a year and a half. I actually completed my master's thesis with mabl on the classification of web page elements, and I've worked on a variety of features, including test case management, coverage, visual testing, and more. And now I'd like to introduce Anton.
Thank you, Lauren. I'm Anton. I work as a product manager at mabl. I've been with mabl for almost 2 years now. And overall, I have over 10 years experience in software development and delivery. I've worked at building various features in the mabl product that you may be familiar with, such as visual change detection, test branching, and integration with CI/CD tools like GitHub Actions.
So today we are going to be covering a lot of topics on the agenda. So the first is talking about the building blocks of a good test suite, also known as the testing pyramid. Then we're going to be talking about our testing strategies at mabl. We're going to dive deeper into actually testing mabl with mabl, and then talking about how we're always trying to be improving our product and testing quality. And then we're going to go into key takeaways for your team and then open it up for a Q&A. So to start off, where does mabl fit into the testing pyramid? So the testing pyramid is kind of the building blocks of a good test suite. And that first foundational level of the testing pyramid is the unit tests. This is primarily focused on covering your code and making sure your code is working the way that you expect it to. Then once you have unit tests, integration tests is kind of the next level. So this is focusing on how code works together instead of just the individual pieces of code. And both unit tests and integration tests are considered best practice. And finally, once you have integration tests, the kind of highest level is the end-to-end tests. So these are moving away from testing code and primarily focusing on testing the user experience, making sure that the workflows that your users go through every day are tested and working correctly. And then once you have kind of these foundational pieces that make up a good testing suite, exploratory testing is another way to continually make your application better. So exploratory testing means that you will click around your application, find places where maybe your test coverage is lacking, and also proactively find issues with your application so that you can fix them. So where does mabl fit into this pyramid? mabl is primarily focused on helping you to do your end-to-end tests and integration tests. We want to make sure that all of our customers that are using mabl are making sure that their applications are working for their clients. So now Anton is going to talk a little bit about what testing the mabl product looks like today.
Thank you, Lauren. So in order to see what testing the mabl product looks like today, it's important for us to have an understanding of the different components that comprise mabl. So on one side, we have the mabl Chrome extension, also known as the mabl trainer, that typically you're going to use to create tests with it. And then we have the mabl CLI. Again, you create tests and you manage tests with it. Now, in addition to that, we do have the web app, which is called just mabl UI that we refer to it internally. This is built with React technology. This is where you're going to go and manage your tests. You're going to create plans, assign those tests to plans, see your coverage, look at the reports, and so forth. And all of these capabilities are powered by cloud services from Google Cloud. This is where our machine learning pipeline is. This is where our compute service, storage, and so forth. Now, for the purposes of this session today, we're going to focus on testing the mabl web app and cover the various strategies that we employ, because most of you will be using mabl to actually test various web apps that you may have. Now, Lauren talked about the testing pyramid, and at mabl, we employ all the different layers of the testing pyramid to work for us. We start with unit tests, which are best practice when it comes to writing and testing code. and every engineer is sort of expected to have some unit test coverage when they open up a pull request. Currently, we have 65% coverage for our user interface web app. Now, the various tools that we use for the web app itself are a React testing library and Jest for the unit tests. But when it comes to other code bases, such as our API, which is written in Java, we use JUnit and Mockito there, and so forth. Now, having unit tests in place, we move on to the integration tests that are done. And for the mabl web app, we use mabl to create those integration tests to test various paths within the app, such as the login flow, for example. That's a simple integration test. Now, there are certain other aspects of the code base, such as the mabl trainer, which is a Chrome extension. And for that, we use a tool called CodeCep.js to create integration tests. And for our API, we currently use Java to write some integration tests. When it comes to end-to-end testing, this is where we use 100% mabl for testing the user journey end-to-end with the mabl application. And currently we have 68% coverage in those based on our coverage metric inside of mabl that some of you may have already seen. Now, whether that's good or bad depends on the team. Typically teams have about 30 to 50% coverage, and everybody tries to have above 80% coverage. And that coverage metric fluctuates depending on how much code you ship in the application every week. Now, we also conduct exploratory testing sessions when there is a big piece of functionality that's about to be released that touches upon multiple components in the system, has multiple user journeys involved. And for this, we take a team-based approach, and we call those exploratory sessions Elmer Foots. This is where the entire team comes together from engineers, product managers, QAs, not only on the team that built the feature, but also from other teams within the engineering organization. And the reason we call those sessions Elmer Foots is because this is where we go and hunt down bugs. And we have a shared Slack channel where during the session, everybody would post insights and issues that they may have uncovered. And at the end of the session, the organizer would go and review all the issues that were shared and then create tickets in our issue tracking system to be addressed after the session so that we can ship the functionality once those are addressed. So some of the key indicators that we look at when deciding whether we should test a certain piece of code or functionality with unit tests versus end-to-end or integration tests with mabl are currently whether, for example, if there's a new user flow, which typically would correspond to an epic level requirement in our system, which is Jira, in this case, the issue tracking system. For every epic, even if it has multiple stories, we need to have at least one end-to-end tests, and usually more, that cover those user journeys within the application. And we can automate testing for that. Now, when a customer reports an issue that they found in our production environment, we make sure to log that issue and then enhance the respective test automation coverage in mabl so that we don't see that regression in the future. And lastly, when we decide how to improve coverage and what areas to cover next, we look at our coverage metrics where we can identify gaps in areas of the application that are being used by users, and we may not have enough test coverage there. And the way we see usage is by using Segment, which is an analytics tool that's integrated with mabl to give us real usage data on what's being used versus what's being tested. Now, our setup with mabl and mabl is a little bit different than most of your setup. So we have our production environment and workspace where we have all the mabl tests that are testing our application locally against our preview environment, development environment, and production environment on every deployment, as well as on schedule. But what happens when our production environment is down for some reason? We need a separate environment, in this case, our development environment, where we have tests that are running against production on a continuous basis to let us know if there are any issues with production that our team needs to attend. Some of the common workflows that typically are associated with testing is we start from the local build, a code branch where an engineer can run mabl tests. Then an engineer would open a pull request where mabl tests run again against the preview environment. Then once things get deployed to development, we run tests on deployment. We also monitor our development environment on schedule. And then when things get deployed to production, we run a full regression suite across all the browsers after the deployment in production. And on top of that, we also monitor production on a regular basis. Now, we use smoke tests, not the full regression suite, to monitor production. And most of you have been told that testing in production is a bad thing to do. Well, we do believe that that's an essential part of your overall quality strategy, where you need to find a way to be able to monitor your production environment to make sure that there are no degradations in services before your users start reporting them. That way you can mitigate them or communicate appropriately with your users. If there is a problem from our monitoring and one of the testing plans fails, a non-core engineer such as Lauren gets paged and she needs to respond within 30 minutes. And we use an integration with OpsGenie for that. And if Lauren does not respond within 30 minutes, then the secondary on-call engineer gets paged. And for some reason that secondary on-call engineer does not respond, the entire engineering team gets paged. And that applies 24/7, even in the middle of the night. So that's the sort of the sequence of workflow we follow if there are issues in production that are identified with our monitoring capabilities in mabl. And then for every plant failure, things get sent to Slack, and we also get email notifications to let us know that there was a problem or what the test results were. And any issues get logged in our Jira issue tracking system. We also tend to use insights. So mabl generates visual change insights that we can review to make sure that the visual changes are something that we intentionally made and there are no regressions. We use the mabl link crawler to identify any broken links that need to be fixed before the users click on them. And we also get performance regressions insights when there is anomaly in the testing time. So for example, if a plan used to take 10 minutes to run and now all of a sudden those tests take 20 minutes to run, then there may be a performance issue with that environment that we need to attend to and investigate to see what the problem was. And with this, I'd like to hand it over to Lauren to talk to us about how that workflow looks like from the engineering point of view as an engineer does their work day to day.
So having a really good test suite is very important for our engineering development cycle. We are very fast-paced at mabl. We are always trying to work on new features and improve features that we already have. So it's really important that we're able to catch any bugs that come up very early in the process. We don't want to slow down this fast iteration because we want to keep getting these features out to customers as quick as possible. And as you can see from this chart, this shows the number of commits per week just to our user interface alone. And some weeks it can get even as high as 100 commits. So it's very important that we can rely on our tests and catch things early so that this velocity doesn't slow down. So once you have designed a feature and figured out what you want to work on, at mabl we'll start working on an individual code branch. So this is the part where we're working on our local machine, and we'll even start adding tests as early as this in the process. So the first type of test that we'll add at this step is unit tests. Here's an example of all of the unit and integration tests we run for the user interface. We'll make sure that at this step of the process, we are not breaking anything that we don't expect. And even this early, we're actually running some of our end-to-end tests. So one of the things that we'll do beyond just the unit tests, we will run our mabl tests using the CLI in headless mode. And what's really cool about that is we can use labels and only run the tests for the parts of the application that are relevant to the change that we're making so that we can get quick feedback, but we're still getting feedback on that user experience. So then once we feel like our code has been tested thoroughly, both through end-to-end and unit tests, we will make a pull request. And this is the part where we can get a lot of feedback from other people on the team. So when we open up a pull request for the user interface, we will actually make a preview environment. So the preview environment will actually be a fully functioning version of our application that you can do exploratory testing in and make sure that everything is looking good. We will also run all of our unit and integration tests again at this point, and we will run our full set of mabl regression tests on the UI as well. Here is where we'll usually add more mabl tests if we feel like the feature that we're adding hasn't been fully covered or if it's a new feature, and we'll make sure to run these mabl tests across all of the browsers to catch any issues as early as possible.
And so this step of the development process, it's also a very good point of collaboration, because up until now, the engineer has typically worked on their own, in their own machine. And here's where they open up a pull request to get feedback and solicit feedback. And for example, I, as a product manager, can go in, look at the pull request, and I can see that all the end-to-end tests in mabl passed. And I might have created some of those tests, and I have confidence that that area and the application works. There are no regressions. And now I can use the preview environment to quickly review the functionality that's being released to make sure that it meets user expectations and the requirements that we set ahead of time.
So once we get all of the feedback that we're going to get on the pull request, and we're very confident that our new feature or addition to a previous feature is working the way we expect it to, we will then merge our pull request into the main branch and our development environment. So now Anton's going to talk about how we get these features from development all the way through to production.
So once things get merged to our main branch and shipped to our development environment, we run a full suite of regression tests across browsers to make sure that there are no issues in our dev environment. And here is an example of a deployment event in mabl that had triggered multiple plans, testing plans for that development environment. And here the obfuscated information on the screen contains the code commit hash that we can then look at and look up in GitHub to cross-reference the test results with the respective code change that was made in order to trace that to the code and troubleshoot issues to make sure that everything works fine. And once things are looking good in our development environment, we then tag it to production. And we also run regression plans on deployment in our production environment. But as I mentioned before, first of all, we have multiple deployments to production every day. So here you can see that we have about 10 deployments per day, sometimes even more or less, depending on the day. But usually we average 5 to 10 deployments per day to production within the team. And not only do we run tests on deployment, but we also run smoke tests to monitor our production environment every 4 hours. So here is an example of one of our smoke plans. This one contains almost 20 tests that run every 4 hours. And if there are any issues with those smoke tests, the on-call engineer gets paged. And this is really important because our application relies on a lot of third-party services that the only way we can identify that there is an issue is by running end-to-end tests across the UI to catch those. And I'll hand it over to Lauren to talk to us about how we continuously improve the process of how we create tests and how we ship even more better quality software.
So there are three main things that we're focusing on when we're trying to improve our product and testing quality. The first thing that's very important is that we work as a team. So we work as a team to define our processes and make sure that we're on the same page about best practices for testing within mabl. So then this allows everyone on the team to be able to contribute to our testing efforts. Engineers are responsible for adding tests to the features that they are working on, but everyone is responsible for doing a constant exploratory testing, adding new regression tests, or suggesting places in the app where we could increase our coverage. And speaking of increasing our coverage, one of the things we actually use is the coverage feature for mabl. So as Anton mentioned previously in the presentation, we used segment integration to figure out where our customers are mostly using our app so that we can prioritize adding tests to the workflows that are most common for our customers. And the coverage feature will show us the pages in our app that are not yet hit with tests, and we'll be working to improve that metric. And then the last thing that we really focus on is constant customer feedback. anytime that there is an issue that is brought up by a customer, we'll make sure to add regression tests for that issue and anything similar that could come up, so that hopefully it won't come up again. And if we're about to introduce that issue again, we'll be able to know really early in the process and catch it. We also are trying to always proactively talk to customers so that we're not just hearing about issues that they have in the app, but we're also hearing about the things that they like using the most and their potential pain points in using different features, so that instead of just responding to issues that come in, we can proactively test for these things and make sure that these common workflows are being worked on and also being tested. And this mabl calls calendar is a really great way for anyone at the company to be able to actually directly talk to our customers. Calls are added to this calendar and we can join any of them. And it's a really great way to just be in contact and actually hear directly from the customer what things that they like about the app and what things they would want to be improved. So now Anton is going to talk about key takeaways for your team.
So when it comes to key takeaways, I think by this time you've already noted that you can incorporate mabl and mabl tests at every stage of your pipeline, all the way from writing the first line of code to testing in production. And you can test continuously across all those environments so that you can catch issues earlier in the development cycle when it's much cheaper to catch those and faster to address them. Now, also, you can integrate mabl with different workflow tools such as Slack and Jira to help increase productivity of your team and keep everybody organized and on the same page. We provide a bunch of out-of-the-box integrations. And if you happen to use Segment, I definitely encourage you to try integrating mabl with Segment, because it's just a matter of configuration to get real-time usage from your application that is overlapped with coverage data, so that you identify if you're testing the right things that your users are using. You can definitely test on deployment and run mabl tests on every single deployment. And it's quite easy to integrate mabl with your CI/CD tool. We offer a number of out-of-the-box integrations, such as GitHub Actions, Bitbucket Pipelines, CircleCI, Jenkins, GitHub Lab. And it is much easier to set up those integrations than you may think. Therefore, I encourage you, if you haven't done so already, to go and give it a try after this event. You'll be surprised how easy it is to set up those things and start running tests continuously on every deployment. You could leverage insights and the coverage reports in mabl, which are something that's unique to mabl. We are sort of the only tool that gives you that comprehensive visibility into your quality, from visual change detection to gaps of where you need to increase test coverage. And lastly, I think we'll encourage you to sort of find a way to monitor your production environment for quality issues, especially to make sure that third-party services continue to operate as expected, so that your users enjoy a nice experience throughout, and you can catch issues before your users do, even when those issues only manifest themselves in your production environment. And with that, I would like to thank you for spending the time with us today. Hopefully this behind the scenes was useful. And I want to say thank you to Lauren, who graciously donated her time to share some of her engineering insight with us. And I want to open it up to questions.
Thank you, Anton and Lauren. So what questions does everyone have? You can submit those in the Q&A panel on the right side of your screen. But we have a few questions lined up already, so let's get started with those. So the first question is, what is the structure of the product organization at mabl?
So there are lots of different parts of our product. We try to make things, keep things that are separate, sort of in separate projects, so that we can constantly be adding new functionality to different projects without having to wait on other ones. So we shared the example of our user interface, but there are many other different parts of our application that are kind of separate projects that all work together behind the scenes of the mabl application. So these we can be working on individually and testing individually to have a faster development cycle.
And just to add to this, what Lauren gave you an overview of how our sort of code base and different components are structured. The way we operate as a team is we follow a slightly modified version of the squad model, where we have small independent teams that are comprised of a few engineers, a product person, a UX designer and researcher, and a QA person that works independently together on a given capability during a predetermined time frame, typically anywhere between 1 to 3, 4 months, depending on the project that that team is about to tackle. And each team is expected to carry that functionality end to end.
Great, thanks. And then the next question is, how frequently are you executing smoke tests in production?
Yeah,
go ahead,
Anton,
go ahead.
You can take it.
Okay, so we are running smoke tests every 4 hours. So these are tests that we're making sure that our application is running smoothly. And as Anton mentioned, when these tests end up not passing, the on-call engineer is notified so that we don't go more than a few hours without being notified of something like this. And then we're also running a full set of tests every time there's a deployment to make sure that everything is functioning the way we expect it to when we're pushing out new features.
Great, thanks. And I think we have just enough time for one more quick question. What is an ideal test coverage and how does mabl calculate that?
Anton, do you want to take this one?
Sure. So when it comes to ideal test coverage, there is no right answer here. It all depends on the team and the product that you're building. So what I mean by this is typically every software product goes through a maturity curve. And originally, you may strive to have very high test coverage. So for example, on one of our new projects where we have a UI library, we're striving for 95% unit test coverage and 100% mabl test coverage using mabl to test mabl. Now, we are already a few months into that project, and it's very hard for the team to keep up with testing to maintain that 95% test coverage, because we're able to write a lot more code in terms of functionality than that requires a lot of time to be spent on testing. Therefore, I think we're going to relax that test coverage a little bit for the time being until we ship necessary functionality for the different requirements. And so our experience from talking to customers shows that, as I said before, some teams don't know what their end-to-end test coverage is, for example, because there is no way for them to measure that. They only can measure unit test coverage. Now, mabl gives us the ability to measure end-to-end test coverage based on the number of page URLs within your application. And teams typically have anywhere between 30% to 60% test coverage there. Some teams have 95% test coverage, but typically those are applications that do not change very often. And therefore, it's easy to maintain that high level of test coverage because the team is not adding a lot of new functionality at the same time. And so the way we measure test coverage at mabl and the coverage capabilities, we only look at active tests that run in the past 2 weeks. So the timing here is important, because if you don't run any tests in 2 weeks, then the test coverage will drop because that application needs to be tested continuously.